skeleton don't speak with such a screech. You'll shake and shudder and survive when you hear these zombies shriek. The spirit's supernatural and shadows of the buzz. You only want to socialize, but I don't think we can. The smiles travel slowly climb, but you're so insane. Stitches from the pickup from your soul. You scream, spooky, scary skeletons that wait to rip my food.
Happy Halloween, everyone! I hope you guys are ready for this next review because it's going to be focusing on a very unique release in my collection. And I know this isn't purely a Halloween DVD, but I still think it's worth reviewing because it's got a very unique selection of episodes. So, for this video, I'm going to be covering the very unique Tupi and Binu DVD, Pumpkin Party. So, without further delay, let's begin with the release history. Pumpkin Party was first released on DVD on September 7th, 2007 by Treehouse, Kaboom, and Peace Arch. Something I should mention about this release is that this was originally not a part of my now gone childhood collection, along with the other DVDs from Tupi and Binu that I owned at the time. The reason why is because it wasn't bought like all of the others, and I didn't have it until later on during the beginning of my DVD collection. And I got very lucky receiving this because my dad found it for me at a now defunct HMV in downtown Toronto. Who would have known that it'd be in my collection? Who would have known that this release in my collection would come from that of all places? After this release date, however, it disappeared. However, that doesn't bother me in the slightest because the episodes on here are all pretty good. But anyways, that wraps up the release history, so now let's move on to the episodes. So, Pumpkin Party features 12 episodes from the original Tupi and Binu series. And our stories for this release are Pumpkin Party, Happy Tupi Day, Train Ride, Magic Bowl, Big Smooch, Tiger Binu, Song and Dance, Dustaroos, Grunt Monster, Dreamland, Super Tupi, and Rocking Tupi. So let's begin with our first episode, Pumpkin Party. While carving a pumpkin and making it into a jack-o'-lantern, Tupi and Binu find out that there's a party going on inside of their pumpkin. Once they enter, they find out that it's a costume party and they decide to attend. So the two of them spend some time trying on different costumes to find the ones that they want to go as, and soon they end up going to the costume party as themselves. So, for the start of the release, this episode is pretty amazing, and it's one of my personal favorite Halloween episodes from any series that I've seen. It starts off as a usual Tupi and Binu episode with Tupi and Binu doing something together, which in this case is carving a pumpkin and making it into a jack-o'-lantern. On the topic of this, I really like the face on their pumpkin, and it really does look amazing. And it looks even more amazing when there's a light inside of it, which I think is pretty cool. Anyway, once they finish up their pumpkin, they find out that something is going on inside of their pumpkin, which turns out to be a party. But not just any party, but rather a costume party. And once they enter, they find the door that leads to the party itself, and both of them decide to go as well. However, they decide to wear costumes, before attending, they need to find the right one that they both want to wear. On the topic of that, let's go over the costumes that the both of them choose to wear throughout the entire episode. To start things off, let's talk about Binu. First off, we have the dragon costume. I gotta say, this looks like a very unique costume, and while it does look a little unusual, I do admit Binu actually makes it work, which is something I can really give credit to. Next up is the celery costume, which looks very odd, but there are food-themed Halloween costumes, so I can at least appreciate it where credit is due in this episode. And then we have a giraffe. I gotta say, as unusual as it is, Binu actually makes a giraffe costume work, and I really like it. And meanwhile, there's Tupi's 4 costumes, so let's talk about the ones that he chose. For starters, there's the balloon costume that Tupi tries out. While it does seem like a cool idea, it just feels a little bit out of left field, even considering the fact that there's no balloon costume in existence unless someone was to make it themselves. Next up, we have a bat costume, which seems a little minimalistic, but it seems like a really good idea. And then we have the unicorn costume. And I gotta say, out of the 4 costumes that Tupi tries on at this point in the episode, I think this one is the best of the 4. And then we have the octopus costume. I gotta be honest, this one looks the weirdest out of the ones that Tupi tries on, and while I do like it, it just looks a little unusual to me. And out of the 3 costumes that Binu tries on and the 4 costumes that Tupi tries on, my respective favorites are easily the giraffe costume and the unicorn costume, because Tupi and Binu really do make them work. Something super coincidental is that they are the 3rd costumes that both of them try on. So that's something. But soon enough, Tupi and Binu soon decide on their costumes. So let's go over the 2 of them and what the costumes they decide on are. So first up, there's Binu, who decides to go as Tupi. I gotta say, this is my favorite out of the costumes that Binu tries on throughout the episode, with the giraffe being a close second. And I gotta say, Binu looks amazing as Tupi, and it makes him look like a smaller version of Tupi. And then there's Tupi's costume, and he decides to go as Binu. It looks kind of odd, but I gotta say, Tupi actually looks amazing as Binu. And I can appreciate their Tupi and Binu going as themselves as each other, and it just works. Who would have known that it make them both stand out in such a unique way? Even if Binu looks is more of a favorite to me than Tupi in this case. I know, I'm, uh, uh, but sometimes it's always the small things about an episode that really make it work. But in the end, Tupi and Binu decide to go to the costume party as themselves, and while we don't see the party itself in this episode, this is still a pretty good way to end things off on a high note. Overall, this episode is an amazing way to start off the release. It features a very good episode idea. It features Tupi and Binu having fun with the costumes that they try on, and in the end, they go to the party as themselves. And many people might see this episode as a bit of a mediocre one because we don't see what happens at the party. I feel like this episode has enough positive in it to outweigh the negatives that one would have. I'll leave that up to you. Overall, Pumpkin Party is an amazing episode, and I give it a 10 out of 10. Now we have our second episode, Happy Tupi Day. While having fun in the leaves outside, Tupi comes across Binu wearing a pumpkin costume. As it turns out, it's Halloween, and Binu is wearing a costume for trick-or-treating. So Tupi takes Binu to a plethora of doors, but each of the first 6 experiences a different holiday. In the end, after a long door search, Binu finally finds the Halloween door and receives what he was looking for, candy for trick-or-treating. So, this is a very unique episode, and this is easily a very good favorite. And while it is tied for my favorite out of the 2 Halloween episodes, I do admit this one is a little bit more amazing than Pumpkin Party, given the fact that it takes place on Halloween itself. This episode focuses on Binu as the main character who is going trick-or-treating. And it also features Tupi as a main character, but I'm leaning more towards the supporting main character. Now, before I continue on with the episode itself, there's something I need to point out. During its airing on Treehouse, Happy Tupi Day aired alongside all these other episodes, with the latter 2 being the ones that already aired, and the other 3 being the ones that air for the first time. And while many people do question why it was done this way, it was easily done to fit the Halloween episodes into the lineup. So, what do you expect? Anyway, for a story, it might seem like a very typical episode, which it kind of is, but if you really look deep, it's a lot more than that. For starters, I really like Binu's pumpkin costume, and it really does work for a character like him. And as for Tupi, while he is his usual funny self like he is throughout most of the series, this episode is one of his biggest highlight episodes. Even though he does get some of the holiday wrong 6 times throughout the episode, it's not really a negative to me, but more of a positive. So for starters, He describes how what trick or treating is down to a T, and and while he does leave Binu to do the trick or treating himself, what makes this even more unique is how he's the one answering the door that Binu is at. So on the topic of this, let's discuss the holiday doors. For starters, there's the Christmas door, which is very festive, and I'm actually very impressed by it. And if anything, it's my favorite out of all the doors in this episode, which is pretty amazing. And it got me in a jolly spirit every time I watched this episode. Next up is the Valentine's Day door, which looks amazing design-wise, and when Binu answers it, it definitely does stand out for a good reason. And this is coming from someone who's not a fan of Valentine's Day themselves, as I've said plenty times before, but enjoys the Valentine's Day specials of many shows that I'm a fan of over the holiday itself. Next up, we have the Fish Day door, which seems like a very odd choice for a holiday, and to be honest, I mostly look past the day itself, but I will say this. The door actually does look pretty amazing with the anchor handle and the porthole window. Next up we have the hippopotamus door, which is a unique idea for a door and a holiday that is featured in this episode. But looking from the outside, you wouldn't know what's behind it until the one who's there is the one answering it. So, but I still think it's pretty good regardless, even if it only reveals what it is on the other side. Next up, we have the Hula Day door, which I do think is another really good one, and it's easily my third favorite in this episode. And I do admit, Tupi actually pulls off this door, the theme of this door pretty well. And I really do like the door design-wise, even though it looks plain and the only giveaway is easily the outside, which isn't a lot to go off of. Next up is the Butterfly Day door, which does feel a little bit weird, but it's definitely a unique one. Although this is the least favorite out of the doors in my opinion, because it just feels a little pointless. However, I will say this: the decoration on the door itself is pretty amazing, and unless you were to know in advance what this door is, you wouldn't know that it's a Butterfly Day door. And last but not least, we have the Halloween door, which is the one that Binu was looking for the entire time. It's on theme with the holiday itself, and it's my second favorite behind the Christmas door, which makes it stand out even more. And not only does it look Halloween themed on the inside, but also on the outside, which is both spooky and amazing. And one thing about the door itself is that the ghost who is on the door becomes sentient and decides to and leaves the door at the end of the episode. While it is a weird way to end things off, I think it's cool. And in the end, Binu got what he was hoping to get, which was candy from trick-or-treating. So a win is a win, and that was the one that Binu was going for the whole time. So I'm glad everything worked out. Overall, this episode is another really good one. It's a very good Halloween special, and while many people do question the doors themselves, I don't think that's a bad thing. It features Binu for a good in a very good major role, and Tupi is also featured in a very amazing way too, which is something I can appreciate. And while many people do question the plot of this episode, I feel like Happy Tupi Day has enough positive in this episode to make it more of a treat than a trick. Overall, Happy Tupi Day is an amazing episode, and I give it a 10 out of 10. Next up is our third episode, Train Ride. While making an apple pie, Tupi and Binu realize that they're out of apples, so the two of them decide to set off to see if they can find any. However, their journey becomes more difficult than normal when fog rolls in. So Tupi and Binu decide to hitch rides on a number of different vehicles, which include a ride on a train, flying in an airplane, and taking a ride on a ship. In the end, they manage to find an apple for their pie, and after calling their adventure successful, they decide to make the apple pie after surprisingly making it back home, much to Binu's confusion. Okay, so now we have our first non-Halloween episode. I'm sure this is going to sound surprising to a lot of you, but this is easily one of my favorite episodes from the original series of Tupi and Binu. If anything, it's the best episode on this release alone, and there are a few reasons why. For starters, it starts off as a typical Tupi and Binu episode with the two of them wanting to make an apple pie that they can enjoy together. However, they soon run into a problem which involves them running out of apples. Why it took them up until this point to realize that they're out of apples is beyond me. But they're lucky that they had barely started making the pie. And I also do like how the apples are now their top priority because they soon turned their attention from making the pie itself to looking for apples. And even though that alone would make an episode pretty good for an adventure, it turns into a very good episode when fog rolls in, which I think is very good visually. And I like that because fog was used as a visual effect, which worked similarly in another episode of another series. That being the Fog Man from season 6 of Thomas, which is one of my 5 favorite episodes from the season. And while I do understand why some people might not consider this to be a fan favorite episode, I actually don't mind this one. But we'll see. But I'll go into that a little bit more when I eventually get to Salty's secret. Anyway, Tupi and Binu are unable to see what's ahead of them in the fog, but fortunately, they come across an assortment of different vehicles to help them in their journey. For starters, I really like the train that is featured in this episode. Some might say it's a little too convenient that Tupi and Binu managed to come across it at just the right time, but whatever. It's the vehicle that makes an appearance in the episode, which is ironically named train ride. So I can at least give them that much credit where it's due. And soon the train itself takes Tupi and Binu a little further during their journey, and they manage to get off at their next stop, which happens to be where the plane is located. And this is a very unique one, because Tupi and Binu are to fly the plane, aim to fly the plane to their to where they are going, with Tupi at the wheel, which I do think is pretty amazing. And not only do we get to see Tupi and Binu flying in a plane in this episode, but we also get to see them skydive once they jump out of the plane. All I can say is that I hope the plane landed safely. Anyway, once they land in the jungle, Tupi and Binu continue in their journey, and after making it across the bridge, they manage to make it to their next mode of transportation, that being a ship. And while many people do question its presence but just after the jungle and with a bridge that leads to it, that doesn't bother me in the slightest. And all I can assume is that this ship is a cruise ship, because that's the best I can come up with for an explanation of what kind of ship it is for this episode. And while I do question how vines appear once they reach where they need to go, I don't mind how they pop in out of nowhere so conveniently. And once Tupi and Binu make it to the elevator, which is the final area before they find the apples, they manage to head inside, and they decide to head up to the apple floor. On the topic of this, I really like how the elevator has different buttons for the different fruits that are presented. And this episode could have worked very similarly if one of the other fruits was seen. Bananas, raspberries, lemons, pears, oranges, cherries, and even grapes could have also made this episode work if they didn't decide on an apple pie being a part of the episode. And I can imagine 7 other versions of this episode featuring something being made with all these different fruits. And that's what makes me like the elevator scene. And maybe that's a weird thing to say, but the evidence and the story potential speak for themselves. Anyway, once they reach where they need the apple floor, Tupi and Binu look around for any apples, and soon they manage to find one. And while it is odd that they were able to find one apple and not many apples, that doesn't bother me in the slightest, because a win is a win, and that's what they were aiming for the whole time. And maybe one apple is not enough to make an actual pie, but the apple pie in this episode would have been very small, so I can at least give them a pass on that. However, we then get to the full ending of the episode, and it is a little confusing. So Tupi and Binu exit the elevator to find only one apple, but then they make their way back home super quickly, which is something very confusing, and it really does open up a plot hole, but it's what makes the ending one of my favorites. Overall, I don't really see that many flaws in this episode, and I think it's a very good one for the release. It's one that I remember growing up with, and it's definitely a real treat for any fan. It features many different vehicles throughout this episode, which I can appreciate, and Tupi and Binu have a set goal for this episode, which turns into a win in the end. While many people do question a few things, I think this is what makes the episode super amazing. And even though there might be a few flaws in this episode, the positives here really do outweigh them, which makes the episode all the more better. Overall, there is not much left to discuss about this episode, and I'm just gonna say that it's pretty good. And as an episode that may be flawed but has a lot going for it, Train Ride is an episode that I really enjoy. It's the best episode of the release, and it's one that I can appreciate for what it does, and it's an amazing favorite. And it gets a 10 out of 10. Next up is Magic Bowl. While cleaning around the house with Binu, Tupi accidentally drops the Tickle Me tail into the fish bowl. However, as it turns out, the bowl is a magic bowl that shows the memories of the adventures that Tupi and Binu went on, depending what is put inside of the bowl itself. So Tupi and Binu drop various items into the fishbowl, and with them comes the flashbacks to many of the adventures Tupi and Binu went on. And in the end, Tupi and Binu learn that even though the days of their adventures are far behind them, they still have the memories of what happened to share together. So, this is a very unique episode, as it's one of those episodes that shows flashbacks to previous adventures. And this is only one of 2 episodes because another episode does something similar, that being cloud gazing. However, while Magic Bowl focuses on Tupi and Binu putting items inside of a magic bowl to see their memories of previous adventures, cloud gazing features Tupi and Binu gazing up at the clouds, that are shaped like things that remind them of the adventures they went on. But we'll see more about that. But we'll see what happens in that episode when I eventually get around to reviewing Bedtime Story. Anyways, there are 5 episodes that this episode shows flashbacks to. So let's get into it. So to start things off, let's go over our first item. The first item that is inside of the fishbowl is the Tickle Me tail, and with it comes a flashback to the episode Tickle Me Tail, where Tupi is messing with Binu, and only a little bit later, the Tickle Me tail becomes sentient and starts tickling everything as well as Tupi and Binu. This is a unique episode to start off with in terms of flashbacks, and it may be a weird one, but it's definitely a unique one. And I know this seems I know I'm giving a very not much information regarding this episode. I will have more to say about this when I eventually get around to reviewing Rocking Tupi. Next up, the next item that they put inside of the bowl is a slipper, and with it comes a flashback to the episode Santa Tupi, where Tupi and Binu take on the roles of Santa Tupi and Santa Binu, and they deliver presents to anything and anyone that they see, with the presents themselves being slippers. This is another good episode to show a flashback to, because this is a really good episode that I previously looked at, and it's a very sentimental one. Next up, the next item that goes inside of the fishbowl is the Valentine's Day card that Tupi made for Binu. And the episode it flashes back to is Sparkle Binu, where Tupi gives the card to Binu, but because of all the sparkles that Tupi put inside of it, it causes Binu to fly, which then leads up to Binu creating the hearts that were made of flowers, apples, umbrellas, fire engines, and lollipops, which I previously covered when I looked at this episode. And while it is a unique episode to flash back to, it's another very good choice. And this is coming from someone who's not a fan of Valentine's Day itself, but enjoys the specials that take place on the holiday itself, which I previously said earlier. Then the next item is the crocodile toy, and with it comes Jungle Tupi, where Binu just wants to have fun with the crocodile toy itself, but Tupi thinks of it as Binu being in danger. This is an episode that I don't really care about, and the flashback of this episode doesn't really make it any better. But we'll see more. But I will mention everything there is involving my opinions on this episode when I eventually get around to reviewing Snowflakes. And the final item that they put inside of the fishbowl is the sheep toy. And with it comes a flashback to the castle, where Binu is unaware of Tupi's whereabouts, only to find out that Tupi is trapped in the tower which happened earlier in the episode. And overall, all those episodes together are pretty good. Are pretty good in terms of flashbacks. And while the castle is a good episode to show as the final episode that has a flashback in this one, I feel like it could have been done a little bit better. They could have chosen any other episode out of the 102 if you were to exclude Magic Bowl and Cloud Gazing. Because, who knows, we could have ended it off with a very strong one. But it is what it is, and that's all I gotta say about that. And at least all 5 episodes are unique in their own way. So that's something additional, I guess. And all of them are pretty good choices regardless. Overall, there's not much left to cover about this episode that I've not yet said. And while Cloud Gazing is my favorite out of the episodes that show flashbacks, this is still a pretty good episode. Although it might be a bit confusing for those who are unaware of the events from Tickle Me Tales, Santa Tupi, Sparkle Binu, Jungle Tupi, and the Castle, which I'd recommend you watch first. This episode feels good enough where it could be its own story, separated from the rest of the series, even though I'd recommend watching the aforementioned 5 before this one, and then watching this one afterwards. Overall, while Magic Mirror may be an odd episode, it's definitely a unique one, and it is what it is. With that said, I give Magic Mirror an 8 out of 10. And our next episode is Big Smooch. While reading The Frog Prince while on a walk through the woods, Tupi and Binu decide to test the true love's kiss theory on an actual frog. After making their way to a pond, they manage to find a frog, and Tupi plans to kiss it in order to turn it into a prince. However, the frog is against being kissed and foils every plan that Tupi has, which also includes being disguised as a princess. In the end, Tupi decides that the theory is not worth testing any further, and he and Binu continue on with their walk through the woods. Well, compared to the last 4 episodes in this review, this one is weird. And I'm not saying it's the kooky kind of weird. I'm saying it's the very weird kind of plot for an episode. And it doesn't really feel like a Tupi, and it works for Tupi and Binu. For starters, it features lipstick in this episode, and it also features the concept of kissing, which I am already against, but I don't totally hate. It could work in any other show outside of this one, but it just feels very raw. It just doesn't feel like something you'd see in a Tupi and Binu episode, especially because Tupi and Binu using lipstick is very weird. Something else to mention is that this episode may be a bit weird, but I kind of like this episode given its story. And while there are a few good things about this episode that make it a little bit better, there's not much to go about with this episode. For starters, Tupi and Binu are characterized in 2 different ways in terms of the kissing idea, with Tupi failing to give a frog a kiss, and Binu succeeding with a snail. Another thing to mention that I do that is the background design with Tupi and Binu at a pond, which I think is a pretty good location for an episode. And then we get to another character in this episode, that being the frog. And I've got quite a little bit to say about him. For starters, this episode features more emotion from him than any other episode. And that's saying something, because I don't really care for him most of the time. But for this episode, I actually consider him to be a very good part about this episode. We see that he's not a fan of kissing himself or being kissed. And I think what he's expressing is not just disgust, but also discomfort. However, I do like how he comes to terms with kissing because when he sees another frog, which is the one that Binu was with when he was with the snail that he turned into other animals. So I can at least give them that much. But it is very weird to see the 2 frogs wearing lipstick. And it's even weirder than Tupi and Binu. And while I'm not totally against it, I'm just not a fan of it. And one other thing to mention is Tupi reading the story of the Frog Prince to the frog. Even though it is only for a short period of time, I don't mind that in the slightest, and I honestly think that's one of the best parts about the episode. Especially because it gave Tupi the idea to disguise himself as a princess in order to trick up the frog, which doesn't end up working. It really didn't go as planned right there. However, this is another one of the episodes where we learn that Tupi is not does know when to give up at something, when from time to time he experiences his own troubles. And even though he did fail in trying to kiss the frog did get a kiss, just not in the way Tupi intended. And that ending where the frogs be turned into snails was pretty odd, but I like it. Overall, this episode is a very weird one, and while many people might be against it, I'm one of the few people who actually considers it to be pretty good. And while it does have some very good moments in it, and it features the frog for a good portion of it, as he is a major character in this episode. And while this episode isn't a bad one, it's more decent than the others, and I consider it to be one of the most decent episodes of the original series. I give this episode a 7 out of 10. And up next we have Tiger Binu. Tupi and Binu are going on a tiger chase with Tupi as the tiger chaser and Binu as the tiger. During the chase, Tupi tries to catch Binu in a number of ways, but Binu manages to escape every time. When Binu manages to get away, he creates a trap for Tupi and manages to catch him. In the end, Binu manages to earn the title of Tiger Chaser as Tiger Binu. Alright, so now we've got this episode to cover. And something you guys should know is that this is the first episode, not just of the original series, but of the franchise as a whole, in terms of the TV shows that Tupi and Binu had. What I mean by this is that when the original series first aired on Treehouse, Tiger Binu was the first episode to air out of the 5 episodes that it was paired with. These are the episodes themselves that first aired on Treehouse when Tupi and Binu made its debut. And Tiger Binu is the first episode out of all 5. Who would have known that Tiger Binu would earn the bragging rights for being the first episode of the original series? Anyway, there's a lot to go over in this episode, so let's get into it. This episode introduces us to Tupi and Binu properly, and we get a pretty good idea of what their characters are. For starters, Tupi is a mouse who loves to have fun with his best friend Binu, while Binu is a cat who is a little more intelligent than Tupi, but also likes to have fun with his best friend Tupi. Then we get to the main plot of the episode, where Tupi and Binu are going to be playing a game of Tiger Chase, with Tupi as the Tiger Chaser and Binu as the Tiger. And while Tupi being the Tiger Chaser doesn't have a lot to present us with, and it doesn't have much to mention, the main focus is Binu. Binu is the tiger in this Tiger Chase episode, and I really like how Tupi managed to turn him into a tiger. Something else to mention is that Binu is a cat and tigers are technically cat-like creatures. So it makes sense that Binu is the tiger in this episode. And he even has a tiger growl to go with it. And I'm going to be honest, Binu having a growl of a tiger is super amazing, and every time I watch this episode, it sounds so satisfying to hear Binu embracing being a tiger. And the tiger growl it sounds so realistic that it even scares Tupi. Who would have known that Binu embracing being a tiger would scare Tupi when he growls like a tiger? Anyway, the main plot of this episode is that Tupi is attempting to catch Binu as the tiger, but Binu manages to escape every time. And it starts off as normal with in their own yard, which then turns into the mountain, which then leads to the mountains and then a cave, which I admit are all pretty amazing. This also shows us that Binu is a very resourceful character who does his best to get out of sticky situations. Then there's Tupi, who sometimes is very determined in what he does, but also runs into his own complications during adventures. This also shows us that adventurous and determined side of Tupi, which is also pretty amazing. However, most of the episode focuses on Tupi trying to catch Binu as the tiger, and while the episode does focus on Binu for a good portion, Tupi's scenes throughout this episode are all pretty excellent, and the music also does help. But in the end, Binu manages to get the advantage against Tupi when he tricks him with one of his weaknesses, that being cookies, which ends up distracting Tupi for long enough to get trapped. While I do appreciate the fact that the twist that where instead of Tupi catching Binu catches Tupi. And while Tupi is technically trapped, he did end up getting the cookies after all, just not in the way he intended. And at the same time, instead of Tupi catching Binu manages to catch Tupi, becoming a tiger chaser and a tiger at the same time. Aside from that, there are some very big highlights about this episode that I like, with those being Tupi trying to chase after Binu, only to fall through a cloud and roll down the mountain as a snowball. There's also the scene where Tupi unintentionally does a bit of monkey bowling, which I do think is pretty amazing. There's also the caves, which I do admit look pretty amazing design-wise. And then there's the biggest highlight of the episode, where Tupi goes into a crowded bat cave, not knowing that they are bats, only to realize it once he exits, and realizing that he has a bat hat, which is pretty cool. And that scene alone is a big highlight. Overall, as the first episode of the entire original series, I think this is a pretty good one. It introduces us to Tupi and Binu properly and features different sides of their characters. And it really does show us what we are in for the rest of the series going forward. And it has a very good plot. It has a lot of funny moments, and as the first episode of the series, I think it was a really good choice, in my opinion. Overall, Tiger Binu is a very amazing episode to start off the entire series. And while it isn't the first of this release as a whole, it is definitely a remarkable episode, all things considered. With that said, I give Tiger Binu a perfect and well-deserved 10 out of 10. Next up is our 7th episode, Song and Dance. Tubi is putting on a stage show that tells 3 different stories, which are The Princess and the Dragon, The Mermaid and the Sea Serpent, and The Shepherdess and the Wolf. In all 3 stories, Patchy Patch is playing the hero who saves the main character from the antagonist, and in the end, Binu manages to save Patchy Patch after Patchy Patch saves the shepherdess from the wolf, and Binu becomes the star of the show. Okay, so now we have this episode, and for the most part, it's really excellent. This episode features a stage show as the main plot, and I gotta admit, this is a very good idea for an episode. What also makes it better is that Tupi has arranged the stage show to tell 3 different stories, and each of them contains singing, and the stories are told through song. And Tupi is also playing the main character in each of the stories. And on that note, let's talk about the stories and the characters that Tupi plays. First up, there's The Princess and the Dragon, where Tupi plays the princess. And I gotta admit, this story is a pretty good one. It's told in a very nice way, and the singing is also pretty good. And the music also helps with that. Then we have The Mermaid and the Sea Serpent, where Tupi plays the mermaid. This is my favorite story in this episode, and I love the way how it's presented, and the singing is top-notch as well. And then there's The Shepherdess and the Wolf, where Tupi plays the shepherdess. I really like how it's presented, and I really like how how the story is told as well. It just feels very amazing. And what makes it even better is that the Shepherdess and the Wolf story is written. It tells a story in a unique way that features Binu towards the end. I don't know if this was actually part of the play or if it was just added in when Binu jumped in to save Patchy Patch, but that's kind of cool. Anyway, there is one thing that holds this episode back a little bit, and that is Tupi needing Patchy Patch to be in the show. I understand why this was done, because it needed to feature Patchy Patch in a certain way, but I feel like this could have been done in a different way. I feel like this episode should have had Binu take on the role as the hero, because he was right there, and Tupi needed to fill the hero slot. And I feel like it would have worked a little bit better if Binu was in the stage show, as he had potential as seen at the end. But there is one thing that saves this episode from being any weaker, and that is our character, Mr. Dragon. And I really like him. For starters, he's a very unique character and takes on the role as an actor in this episode. And as for how he's presented in the stories that are told, first up, there's The Princess and the Dragon. I do think this is the weakest of the stories that he acts that he's in, because he doesn't show that much action and it only shows emotions in this story. However, I can appreciate his intimidating emotions where the credit is due. Next up, we have the mermaid and the sea serpent. And this is the story that shows the dragon's acting skills at their finest. He shows a lot of action as well as a lot of expression, which is something I can really appreciate. And this really does feel like a natural, he really does feel like a natural actor in this story. And then there's the shepherdess and the wolf, which is a mix of the two. He knows when to show emotion, and while he doesn't show much action, the emotions really do speak louder than what is presented. And I'm gonna be honest, the Mr. Dragon really does do a good job at being an actor, even though there could have been a little bit more. Overall, this episode is a pretty good one from start to finish, as the stories are told very great and the songs are amazing. And while I'm against the idea of Patchy Patch needing to be in the show, that doesn't ruin the episode entirely. Because the negatives in this episode really can outweigh the positives, which would also work for others, but that would depend on the story and the episode. Overall, Song and Dance is an amazing episode and is one that is worth watching. And I give it a 9 out of 10. Our next episode is Dustaroos. While searching for Binu's car, Tupi and Binu end up in Dusty World, and they soon find Binu's car, which is being driven by troublemakers named the Dustaroos. So Tupi and Binu try to subdue the Dustaroos, with Binu taking the wheel in the car, and Tupi distracting them with his airplane. In the end, Tupi and Binu manage to get the car back after distracting the Dustaroos with the plane. Okay, so now we have this episode. And compared to many others, this is a strange episode. And what I mean by this is that it features some very unusual characters while also taking place in a very weird destination, in a very weird location. On the topic of this, it does we also get the first appearances of our new one-time characters, that being the Dustaroos. First, and I'm just gonna say there's not much to go about with how they're presented. All we know is that they like to mess with those who try to do whatever, but while also trying to have fun. I don't really see much story potential in these guys, which is why I don't really care about them. And not for nothing, but they also manage to turn the search for Binu's car into a car chase, which doesn't really help. What also doesn't help is that they never appear again in the original series, which is pretty disappointing. Something else I should point out is that most of the episode being a car chase isn't that big of a deal. But what doesn't help is that what drags it down an awful lot is that the Dustaroos only appear once in the original series and never again. And for most of the episode, Tupi and Binu are trying to subdue them in order to get Binu's car back. What also doesn't make what also makes the Dustaroos very lackluster is the fact that they disappear after the ending of this episode, which doesn't really help with how I feel about this episode. However, there are a few things to point out that kind of save it. The animation that is used in this episode is pretty okay, and I actually really like it. We also get to see Binu having a fun time with the Dustaroos for part of the episode, which is pretty cool, and I can give them that much. And plus, Binu manages to go along for the ride with them at first, and then takes the wheel and drives the Dustaroos throughout Dusty World. So that's something. And even though this doesn't help with the episode, the title card really is a good one. And I might go so far to say that it's one of my favorites. Other than that, there's not much left to discuss with this episode other than it's just decent. And while I don't particularly hate this episode, and I can sit through it, it's one that I wouldn't consider to be a favorite no matter how many times I watch it. Overall, even though it is an okay episode, Dustaroos is just lackluster, and it is what it is. With that said, I give Dustaroos a 7 out of 10. And up next we have Grunt Monster. While getting out of their winter gear after having fun in the snow outside, Tupi and Binu find a monster named Grunt, and they are determined to find out what kind of monster Grunt is. So they go around their house checking out different places and ask several monsters if they know about Grunt. In the end, Tupi and Binu find out that Grunt is a sock monster after finding out that under one of Binu's socks was a monster that looked just like Grunt. Alright, so now we have this episode, and for the most part, it's pretty excellent. This episode introduces us to another new character, that being Grunt, who is a very sweet monster. He comes off as a very friendly type, and also makes nice little noises, whether if he's showing affection or if it comes naturally. And Tupi and Binu are And when Tupi and Binu are unaware of what type of monster Grunt is and don't know where he belongs, they go about their house while also trying to find out what type of monster he is. So on the topic of that, let's talk about the monsters who can be found throughout this episode. First up, we have the under the bed monsters. Design-wise, they're pretty good, but there's not much to them because they are just there for one episode. However, I won't say that I hate them. I just don't have an opinion on them. Next up, we have the closet monsters, who are probably my least favorite type of monster in this episode. Design-wise, they look pretty odd, and there's not much to go about with them since they're only here for one episode and then they disappear. So yeah, I don't really care about them, but I'm not saying that I hate them. Next up, we have the Toy Box Monster, who is actually my favorite of the episode. Even though he's basically the same one from Binu Blows Raspberries, instead of being a antagonist like monster in that episode, he's actually really friendly here, and he comes off as very friendly towards Tupi and Binu, and also shows and also cares, and also shows some love towards Grunt, which is something I can definitely appreciate, making him my favorite of the monsters who appear in this episode. Next up, we have the storybook monsters, who are the weirdest of those who appear. Design-wise, they're okay, but they come off as very jumpy, hyperactive, and very odd. However, I do think they are good, but like many of the others, I have no opinion on them. And last but not least, we have the bath monster, who comes off as one of the weirdest in terms of design. Even though there's not much to his character, and like many of the others, I don't really care for him as a character. And as I said, design-wise, he's pretty odd, but it looks unique enough to make him stand out. So yeah, all the monsters come off as a very decent and group of characters in this episode, but the toy box monster definitely is a favorite to me. Anyway, towards the end of the episode, we finally get to see what kind of monster Grunt is. Even though Tupi was unsure about what kind of monster Grunt was, it was soon revealed as soon as Grunt and Binu sat on the couch, where it was revealed that on one of Binu's socks was a monster that looked like Grunt, which then showed us that Grunt is actually a sock monster. At first, which is pretty amazing considering that I didn't think much about Binu's socks throughout the episode until I realized that they were there for a crucial part of the plot. And that is something that I can definitely appreciate for what it is. And in the end, Tupi and Binu managed to find Grunt, where Grunt came from, and they managed to find out what type of monster he was. And it definitely goes without saying that a sock monster is definitely a unique one. And this is one of the very big reasons why Grunt is a favorite. Overall, this episode is a very good entry into the series. It's a very sentimental one, and it introduces us to a new character in a very good way. Grunt was adorable for what he was worth. Tupi and Binu got some good focus. The monsters in this episode are pretty amazing, and overall, it's just a very feel-good. It's easily a really amazing feel-good episode. Overall, Grunt Monster is very good, and it's a worthy favorite of mine. With that said, I give Grunt Monster a very good and well-deserved 10 out of 10. And up next we have Dreamland. While enjoying the summer weather, Tupi notices that Binu is asleep and is having a dream. So Tupi heads into Binu's dream to see what makes him happy. Tupi then decides to climb what he thinks is a mountain in order to follow Binu and get an answer to his question. When he makes it to the top, he realizes that Binu isn't able to answer his question, and he decides that it only makes him happy that Binu's happy. And in the end, Tupi exits Binu's dream to enjoy his ice cream, while also wishing Binu sweet dreams. Okay, so now we've got this episode, and for the most part, I really like it. Tupi is the main character in this story, and while Binu does appear, he doesn't play that major of a role in this episode, as he's only there during the beginning and the end, and he's also only seen in the dream. On the topic of this episode is the one of 2 episodes that features Tupi going inside of Binu's dream. The other one is a more infamous episode, which I will look at another time, but regardless of which, I think this episode focuses on the idea a lot better. So the idea of Tupi going inside of Binu's dream is that Tupi sees that Binu is very happy, and Tupi wants to find out what makes Binu happy. However, while Tupi is able to go inside of Binu's dream, he is unable to communicate with him, as Binu is unable to hear him since it's Binu's dream, and I can only assume that that Binu can't hear Tupi because Tupi is from the real world, and the dream world Binu is from the dream world. It's kind of similar to something that happened back in For Whom the Sweetie Belle Toils, where Sweetie Belle and Princess Luna are seen early on in Sweetie Belle's life, but no one can see or hear them. And I will discuss this episode some other time, but it's kind of similar to what happens in Dreamland. While Tupi is able to see Binu and is able to say whatever, Binu can't really hear Tupi because Tupi is from the real world. Anyway, what I really like about this episode is that it focuses on Tupi attempting to climb what he thinks is a mountain. I will go over the revelation regarding this mountain in Binu's dream a little bit later, but let's continue. So while I do see the idea behind this episode and how they needed to fill 4 minutes and 30 seconds, I really feel like showing a lot of scenes of Binu and Dream World Binu and Real World Tupi climbing the mountain seem a bit repetitive after a while. Not to mention the fact that we only get a few scenes when Binu takes breaks in between, and while Tupi catches up. Not to mention the fact that we also see various scenes that give people an idea that this is no ordinary mountain. Anyway, once Tupi makes it to the top, he tries to ask Binu what makes him so happy in his dream. However, Binu is unable to hear Tupi and Tupi is unable to get an answer. This is where we come to the end of the episode, and I actually think this is something similar that I mentioned earlier in Big Smooch. Tupi deciding that his question is not really important does show that he himself doesn't have his priorities set, and he cares deeply about Binu, whether if it's in the real world or somewhere else. And I'm glad to see that he's come to terms with the fact that it only makes him happy that Binu is happy. Anyway, after Tupi is done with his adventure in Binu's dream, he heads back home and decides to enjoy the weather while Binu is asleep. And in terms of the real world, that's the type of ending I can definitely enjoy. Now, in that regard, there is one more thing to mention, which I've been holding up until now, that being what the mountain is. And as it turns out, the big twist in this episode is that it wasn't a mountain that Binu and Tupi were climbing, but they were climbing all over Tupi. And there are some subtle hints to give the idea that it was actually Tupi. First off, the green at the top of the so-called mountain was actually Tupi's bucket hat, which Tupi had been wearing throughout the episode. The gray fur on the so-called mountain was actually Tupi's fur, which I barely noticed up until this review. The strawberries, what looked like something strawberry related, was actually the strawberry ice cream that Tupi in the dream world was having. And the big giveaway is that what's located on the far left is Tupi's nose, because if one were to look at this particular scene, they would have noticed the dead giveaway. And I didn't really take much notice about this particular scene until I was analyzing it for this review. And man, it really is surprising on so many levels. Overall, while many people do see this episode as a bit of an odd one, I consider it to be a very sentimental one. It features Tupi going on an adventure inside of Binu's dream, and he also learned a very good lesson, that some questions are not worth asking if it makes someone happy. And while Tupi didn't really get an answer to the question that he was asking, I'm glad he came to terms with how it only makes him happy that Binu is happy. And even though Binu doesn't play that big of a role in this episode, I can appreciate I can definitely appreciate how much time he's had in this episode, given how it focuses on Tupi. Overall, Dreamland is a pretty good episode, and it's easily a very unique one. With that said, I give Dreamland a 9 out of 10. And our next episode is Super Tupi. Tupi and Binu take on the personas of Super Tupi and Super Binu and decide to become superheroes for the night. During the night, they receive calls of those who are in trouble. And soon, Super Tupi and Super Binu fly off into the night in order to save Mr. Slim, Mr. Bubblehead, and Mrs. Bigtail, and in order to get them out of trouble. And in the end, after saving Patchy Patch, Tupi and Binu call it a job well done and praise themselves for being super superheroes. Okay, so now we have this episode to cover. And for the most part, it's very remarkable. So, for this episode, Tupi and Binu take on the personas of Super Tupi and Super Binu, with Tupi wearing his superhero outfit, and Binu wearing his power pajamas, which we first see in power pajamas. And on the topic of that, while I do think power pajamas is a good introduction to Binu becoming Super Binu while wearing his power pajamas, this episode is a very good way to feature him wearing the same power PJs, especially because they stuck around for all of the TV series. And I know this because they just so happened to return in the reboot series. Anyway, what makes this episode very great is how Tupi and Binu manage to perform many superhero rescues, which starts off with Mr. Slim, where they fly through the sky in order to get where they need to go, and they manage to save Mr. Slim from falling off of the chair, which I do admit is a pretty good way to start off the night as superheroes. And soon, things cool down for a little bit before the next call comes in with and then Tupi and Binu set off to save Mr. Bubblehead. And during the travel sequence, I really like how they introduced the Tupi Mobile, which I admit is a very cool vehicle, and I wish they did more with it. However, I can appreciate it for what it's worth, for the time it's had on screen. And soon enough, Tupi and Binu managed to get to and help out Mr. Bubblehead, and then things cool back down again before the third rescue, where they need to save Mrs. Bigtail. And for the third mission, they use their air travel vehicle that can turn into a helicopter to start off which turns into a helicopter to start off their mission, a plane which they use to travel through the air super fast during their journey to Mrs. Bigtail, and then it turns into a spaceship once they get to space. And and believe me, this travel sequence throughout in this part of the episode is definitely one of my favorite parts, and I really think they should have used this a lot more. Anyway, once the two of them manage to arrive, they are soon ready to help Mrs. Bigtail. And soon, they manage to spot her, and they soon manage to help her out. And after calling it a job well done, they get one final call from Patchy Patch, who just so happens to be in the same chest that he was in throughout this entire episode with Mr. Slim, Mr. Bubblehead, and Mrs. Bigtail. While this is an odd way to close out the episode, I admit I do think this was clever in order to fill the runtime and to feature Patchy Patch in another good way. And in the end, Binu manages to help out Patchy Patch, and everything works out well in the end. And afterwards, Tupi and Binu call it a job well done as Super Tupi and Super Binu, and they call it a night for the time being. Overall, this episode is a really good one. It features Tupi and Binu as superheroes for the entirety of the story. It has some amazing scenes that are well worth the watch, and it features both of them in a very good way, which I can appreciate. So overall, that covers Super Tupi, an episode that is incredible, marvelous, and fabulous. And above all, it's a 10 out of 10 episode, all because of
Super Toopy and Super Binu!
And last but not least is our final episode, Rocking Tupi. Binu is playing music on his xylophone, and when Tupi overhears the music, he decides to join in. Once Tupi gets his guitar, he and Binu start to play together. Soon after, many of their friends start to join in and play music with their instruments. And soon after, everyone starts playing together in playing their song in what Tupi and as Tupi dubs it, dubs their group of musicians, the Tupi and Binu Band. So, as a closing episode, I think they made a really good choice. And believe it or not, this is easily one of my top favorites. There's a lot to talk about with this episode, so let's get into it. The episode starts off as a typical run-of-the-mill Tupi and Binu story, with Binu having fun on his xylophone, and Tupi, on the other hand, is reading a book. But soon after, Tupi then notices Binu playing on the xylophone and decides to join in. Soon after, he gets his guitar and starts playing along with Binu. However, as the episode goes on, more of their friends start to join in, and they start playing their song throughout the episode. One thing that I really like about this episode is that almost the entirety of the episode is actually a song, which is something I can really appreciate. And on the topic of that, let's go over the instruments that each person plays. First up, there's Tupi, who's playing the guitar and is also the singer and is also the main singer. I think the guitar is the perfect instrument for Tupi to play, and the fact that he's the singer also makes it pretty good. Not to mention the fact that he also dances a few times during the episode. Next up, there's Binu playing the xylophone. This is a very good choice for Binu, and I feel like the xylophone is a very good instrument choice for him. Then we have Mr. Elephant playing the bass, which is a very good instrument, and he's the first one to join Tupi and Binu before everyone else. Then we have Mrs. Octopus playing the drums, which is a very unique instrument choice, and I really like how they chose her to be the one to play them. Next up, we have Mr. Dragon playing the piano. This is a very good choice because even though a piano isn't normally used in a band, I actually give him credit for being able to play it, and he's able to pull it off with ease. Then we have Mrs. Bear playing the guitar. This is a very good instrument choice, and I like it. And she's able to play it with style, which I really admire. Then we see the sheep, with one of them playing the bongos at one point in the episode, and then later on, what I can only assume is the same sheep from earlier, as well as two others, become backup dancers, which is definitely something I can appreciate. Then we get to the penguins playing trumpets, and the owl and Mr. Owl playing the saxophone. These instrument choices are very good, and I like how they were able to play them, and I really enjoy that. Something else to point out, which outside of the song portion of the episode, is the ending, where Tupi assumes that Binu is playing music, only to realize that he's playing with his tea set after they finish singing. That even though that ending is a little odd, it's definitely a unique way to end the episode. And a few other things to mention are the visuals and the background music, because when's the next time we're going to hear music like this and see visuals this good in another episode? And in addition to that, I really like how everyone was able to come together to play their song, the Tupi and Binu Band. That being the name of, and with that being the name of the band, I really like it. But the main reason why I think this episode is a top tier favorite is easily the fact that it's the last episode on this release, but it's also the first episode on another release, that being Rocking Tupi. And believe me, with how much I like this episode, it's hard to believe that I'm looking forward to reviewing that one sometime soon. But we'll eventually get to that when I get to it. Overall, as the finale episode of the release, Rocking Tupi is a really remarkable episode. It's a wonderful episode. It's a wonderful episode that features all of the characters coming together to do something fun as a group, and it really pays off in the end. And the character selection is solid, the instruments they play are super amazing, and overall, it is a very good way to end off the release that is advertised as a Halloween release, but is in reality a really mixed bag. Overall, there are no flaws in this episode, and it's definitely a star-studded favorite. Overall, Rocking Tupi is an awesome episode and an awesome one to end the release. And I give it an easy 10 out of 10. So, what are my final thoughts on Pumpkin Party? If it isn't already clear, I love this release. It may not purely focus on Halloween, with only 2 episodes focusing on the holiday itself, but that doesn't bother me in the slightest. And given my ratings, I think this makes this DVD my favorite out of the ones that I've covered so far. The DVD has a very good mix of episodes, with 2 of them being Halloween themed, and the other 10 being focusing on different topics. While that might seem like a bad thing to many people, I actually don't see that, because I can get a lot of enjoyment out of it, despite the fact that it doesn't focus purely on Halloween. And I'm proud to own such an amazing release, and this is definitely the one to beat in terms of the Tupi and Binu DVDs. But we'll see, and that's saying something, because I consider this to be a very underrated release in terms of the Tupi and Binu DVDs. Overall, the story selection is solid, it features a very good mix of episodes, and many of these episodes have gone on to be my top tier favorites. This is definitely one release that you must 100% have for your collection. And that's gonna do it for this review. Thank you all for watching. Hope you all enjoyed. Feel free to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel for more VHS and DVD reviews and home media related content. and be sure to check out my other reviews that are in the playlist down below in the description. So, which release am I going to cover next time? Well, even though I already looked at this release in an earlier video, I can't resist the urge to review it. So next time we're going to be reviewing we're going to be taking a look at some of the most wild adventures from season 5 of Thomas in the next release, Spills and Chills and Other Thomas Thrills. Once again, thank you all for watching, and I will see you all in the next VHS DVD review.